Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. Today I wanted to do, this week, I'm going to try to change up the format, a little bit of New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union, and bring you some additional news other than just 2A news. But let's start with the 2A news. Today, it started Friday, FPC has let us know, so that's Firearms Policy Coalition, has let us know that the Democrats in Congress are now wanting to impose a 1,000% tax on firearms. That means that if you had a $500 firearm, it would now be $5,000. Now, the idea here is that if they increase the price so much, they'll reduce access to them. So this effectively takes the poors, or anyone that's working for a living, and puts a firearm completely out of their reach for purchase. This is gun control. This is backdoor gun control, and since they can't pass it or seem to get it passed, they're going to try to do it any way they can. They've been going and using the ATF to go after FFLs, so Federal Firearms License holders that sell firearms. Now they're trying to do this. In addition to that, in the Mock v. Garland update, the judge says in the opinion that the case is likely to succeed on merit. That means that the Firearms Policy Coalition and GOA case and SEF their case is likely to succeed because they think that the Mock v. Garland case is illegal. Now, what's interesting about this is that one of the judges said that there was no historical analog for the ATF to make such rules, especially in that braces have been in use and on sale for 10 years. That whether they are used as stocks or braces is up to the user, and neither do anything but make the pistol more accurate and safer. So, in addition to that, there's been another series of FFLs that are under assault. In Philadelphia, there is two gun shops, and I'm not going to name them, as well as JSD Supplier and Polymer 80, that Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia, is actually going after them and trying to sue them into oblivion so that they can't make or sell firearms or firearms accessories. If you don't know what Polymer 80 is, Polymer 80 makes these frames, Glock frames basically, or Sig Sauer frames nowadays in the Sig P320, that are partially finished, and it's up to the user to end up finishing them so they can make their own firearm at home. Now, this is what the Mock v. Garland stuff is all about, is they're after anything that you can finish at home, 80% receivers, because they see this as a huge problem, when in reality it's like maybe 1% of any gun that's ever been used in any crime. And it's always been legal in the United States of America to make your own firearms. In more positive news, Texas has now got a bill called House Bill 3, in which they're trying to get school marshals and law enforcement guys into each school to protect them against school shootings. Now, I mentioned once before on this podcast that there's a school district that has actually already started down that path and have armed staff there to defend their students. This is the first time that anyone's actually listening to us, any state really, that is actually listening to us in the 2A community and saying, hey, we know what the problem is. You're not willing to address the problem of mental health care. So why not protect the kids like we protect gold, banks, and money, in general? Why aren't we protecting one of the most valuable resources in the United States with firearms in schools, especially with teachers that are willing to step up, or staff members, administrators, whoever, that are willing to get the training, the proper training, to go ahead and carry safely and to be able to engage targets as necessary to defend the kids that we give them to care for. Now, having had, you guys have heard my background 1,001 times, and I don't plan on going on it again, but this seems like the most likely thing that I can think of after having to deal with this stuff that would probably end up with the right result: curbing school shootings, period. if you look at the stuff that happened in Tennessee with the trans shooter that went in to go and attack schools, she actually passed up another school or another target because that school was armed or had armed staff or armed guards there. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to think that if you have armed people and you're a criminal trying to perpetrate a criminal act, that you're going to get dealt with decisively and pretty much end. And that's a good thing. I think that's what I say all the time when I say stay strapped or get clapped. This is kind of in that, guys. And I would love to see more school districts that, and especially states like Texas, that are willing to put the language in law and try to pass a law that says this is okay. Now, a lot of the language in House Bill 3 is focused on trying to get former law enforcement and law enforcement in general in each school and funding them. However, there's enough language in this that allows for armed staff if they're willing to go through the right training. Now, I have never thought that having more guns in an area is a better thing, but having enough guns with the right people behind them, especially if they're trained like air marshals, that would end this in a heartbeat. Like I said, if you take down the signs that are in all schools, especially in New Mexico, that say no firearms allowed on campus, so you're saying that there are no one that's armed there. Okay? That's a glaring advertisement to invite bad guys to come in and do very bad things to kids. So, we're trying to take steps as a general populace to protect kids from teachers who are being turds and other staff members who are being turds. Why wouldn't we protect them from the jackholes that are willing to grab a gun and go do something stupid? Now, I am of the volition, and I have been of the volition, especially having to deal with that stuff, that it is all a mental health issue. There is nothing that can be done, especially for a lone person who's wanting to flip that bit and go perpetrate one of these horrible acts, whether it's in a school or it's another soft target. The only way to deal with them is to physically deal with them, because they have went past any possible reasoning, and they have decided that this is where they're going. And the other stories that are about, Trump is now facing 500 years in jail for his indictment, his most latest and greatest indictment. Now think about that. This guy, who seems to be indicted every other week nowadays, it seems to me, just being a third-party observer, most people who listen to my podcast know that I am not a fan of the Orange Man, not in a huge way. I think he did a lot of good things, and I think that a broke clock is right a couple times a day, and I think Trump is unfortunately being demonized when he did nothing really wrong. The January 6th stuff to me was a riot, and yeah, it's bad that they did it in the House and the Senate or whatever the hell it was, in Congress generally, but I don't see those buildings as being the seat of power. What I mean is they're ours, but the power isn't derived from the building itself. So I wouldn't be one of those people that actually saw it as a huge deal other than it was stupid, and they shouldn't do that. And anyone involved with the January 6th stuff knew better. And I say that because you knew after the day before and the 2 days leading up to it that this was basically the feds trying to set up something, and they all took the bait and went for it. So anyone who's been done up by it for whatever reason, I think they're idiots for doing it because they knew better, simply put. Coming out now, years after January 6, 2020, you find out that there definitely was federal involvement. Well, duh. Anyone who was on the outside looking in at that time frame knew that we were not supposed to go there, and if we went there, you should have been peaceful, and you should have walked away the minute it was over. Instead, you guys went into places you shouldn't have, and you got dealt with the federal judicial system, and they're going hard. Now, I don't agree with them going as hard as they are after any of those people, because I see them doing a hell of a lot less than what happened in Ferguson, but at the same time, again, you knew better, dumbasses. In other news, Andy Ngo, if you don't know who that is, he's a reporter for the Post Millennial. He is the gentleman who was beaten down by Antifa in Seattle for reporting on them. He has been in court where they're trying to determine who actually beat him and the charges that should be filed against them. Well, they stopped court reporters from taking pictures and people from taking pictures just to have it reinstated later that they would have a pool reporter who would take pictures for everyone. If you don't know what a pool reporter is the one reporter, photography, audio, writer, whoever. They're allowed inside those secure areas to report out to the other people in the political pool or in the pool of journalists that are allowed to report on said goings-on. Man, the culture war stuff is kind of hilarious that it's heating up multiple times, and, I think it's hilarious that people start talking about people like Lizzo. Lizzo is someone who should lose some weight because it would be healthier, and I say that because I'm in the process of losing weight myself. But there's her backup dancers have went after her and are trying to sue her for a couple of reasons. One, these backup dancers are supposedly smaller than her and were fat-shamed. Okay, don't care. I really believe that there needs to be some level of shame come back to some things in our country. But more interesting and more hilarious is that Lizzo was making these dancers eat bananas, supposedly, from strippers' vaginas. Now, being the libertarian that I am, or the ANCAP that I am, I don't know how you force anyone to do anything, especially something as vile as this, but they felt compelled to bring this up in a court case, and as I'm reporting on multiple stories this time, to enlighten you on the goings-on and the news and why it should matter to you right now. Now, the culture war issues are just to keep you abreast of what's going on, because most of us in the 2A community could care less about culture war stuff, except for the culture war is actually spilling over into our world. We have idiots like Dylan Mullaney coming into our space and trying to tell us not to have firearms. You have, Matthew McConaughey coming out and talking about firearms. These are stars in the cultural spaces that need to shut the hell up, as I said on the last podcast. But they also we need to be cognizant of what's happening in the cultural war spaces so that we can actually be informed about what's going on. If you hadn't heard with the stuff that's going on with the weaponization of the Department of Justice, which we always know is happening because we're in the 2A and we're the guys that are on the gallows looking over at the other dudes going, oh, your first time, huh? Well, we've been here for a while in the 2A community. Well, Jim Jordan is now joined on with Speaker McCarthy, House Speaker McCarthy, for calls or possible calls for impeachment of Joe Biden. Now, this is where I rub against part of our community because our community is mostly conservative, but we have a set of Republicans, and we've had them for years now, that are do nothing. And when I say that, they had the House, the Senate, and they had the presidency, and they didn't bother to pass anything that was pro-2A because it wasn't political expedient. And now that they're on the hot seat, they're expecting us as a voting bloc, which we are a pretty good, sizable voting bloc, to come out and support them in things like this. Now, do I support the impeachment of Joe Biden? Absolutely. Dude is weaponizing the Department of Justice against people that are political opponents, and that should never happen in the United States. That said, are they going to do it? No. They're going to send a strongly worded letter to someone, and nothing's going to happen because we have no one on the conservative side that would actually stand up and actually do something. And this is why I left the party, is because time and time again you would see people on the Republican side say, yeah, we're going to do this, and then they get in and they side with the other guys. It's time that you actually pull the wool off your eyes and look what's going on. So while there are tons of calls right now from people to not only impeach Biden, but to impeach Merrick Garland. I see none of them going anywhere because, number one, they only have the House now, and number two, they are pretty much the party of doing nothing. They're not going to do anything. They are Republicans in name only. You guys would call them rhinos. I would call them typical politicians. And it's time for you to realize that and start acting accordingly. If you're going to vote to try to get out of what's going on right now, you need to look at those people that are in power right now that you put in power and possibly primary them because they're doing nothing. Absolutely nothing. And if you don't believe me, look at what we're facing with the Mock v. Garland, the other cases in the courts right now where we're having to defend the Second Amendment because these guys will not do anything and they'll turncoat the minute they get a chance to. Let's see what else I got. This is one that I thought was interesting. Facebook fact checkers, which we know aren't really fact checkers, anyone in the 2AA who has ever posted anything on Facebook or has a Facebook page, New Mexico Black Rifle Operators does. I do myself. And I have posted things not only about COVID, but about the 2A and have been fact-checked multiple times and had posts deleted and put in Facebook jail. Well, it's been found out that these guys that are running fact checks are actually not really fact checkers and actually are in cahoots with the federal government. Duh. Okay. What I think is more interesting about this is that they're finding out what these files that keep getting leaked from Facebook and Twitter and all these, or X now, any of these big tech corporations, that they're looking at these files and finding these little tidbits of stuff, and they're slowly news outlets, usually alternative news outlets like the Post Millennial or Timcast or a number of the ones that I think this was from the Daily Wire, that they were actually talking about this, and they're finally bringing this to light. Now, we've all known it. I know several of my friends and listeners of New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union who have been fact-checked when we knew we were right, especially when it came to COVID. After the stuff with Dr. Fauci coming out and finding out that the federal government had their hands up the skirt of big tech and was pulling the strings and saying, don't say this, don't allow this to be said, we've known this. COVID proved to a lot of people what we've always known, that we were compromised, and that if they scare us enough, they will push us in little holes, and we will draw back. Now, some of us did, some of us didn't. Some of us had no choice because of where we were working at times. That was definitely a case in my case because I worked for a school district, and working for a school district, you kind of have to toe the line before they try to get rid of you. Now that I'm free from the school district and can do whatever the hell I want, I can actually tell you that, yeah, that was a thing. I was, in no short order, I felt very pressured to take the shots. I took 2 of them. I didn't take any more. I wish I would have listened to, the other half of my department that didn't do it, because it did nothing. I still ended up getting COVID. I still ended up having to deal with all the other crap. And now I have this, emergency use crap in my system that I don't know what's going to do long term. In other news, Ohio schools are proposing to put chaplains in as counselors. Now, I think this is interesting because in the culture war, you start looking at stuff that's going on, and we've had a lot of blowback in lots of weird places, and to see people return to the old way of doing business. You're seeing more people return to faith and faith-based organizations, and now to allow this in the school. I have some heartburn here, even though I am a Christian myself, in that we're supposed to separate church from state. But I honestly think the schools, as screwed up as they are, probably could do some good with having a chaplain there as a counselor. And maybe, just maybe, it might actually have some effect. Mississippi has banned boys from wearing skirts. What they're saying is that anyone who's assigned on their birth certificate, whatever sex they're assigned on their birth certificate, you have to conform to that style of dress. That doesn't mean you can't wear shorts. It doesn't mean you can't wear pants if you're female, either or, okay? What it means is that if you automatically come out as trans, you now have to conform to whatever the sex is on your birth certificate, because this is no longer allowed. What Mississippi has realized is that any place that has allowed guys to act the part of women have allowed rapists into their midst, and they've had sexual assaults happen. This happened in West Virginia. This has happened in several places around the country. And Mississippi is the first one that said, no, outright, no, we're not doing that. You're going to do this. Now, something similar happened in the school district I was in, that you weren't allowed to go into places unless you were that genetic sex. However, I can tell you in New Mexico, there's a strong leaning towards letting that slide. Just letting them go ahead and do whatever it is. Don't buck the wind, so to speak. And they're going to end up with one of those horrible cases where someone gets hurt because of it. Locally, in Farmington, New Mexico, the fair started Friday. We had the parade, which shut down part of our city, just like Connie Mack does. Connie Mack ended last week. So naturally, the fair is going on. This is a big deal in rural parts of our country. And a lot of people do cool stuff, and there's a lot of school districts in the area that aren't starting school until after the fair starts. This is a new thing in northwest New Mexico. Gas prices in New Mexico and across the country have started to peak and rise even higher. This is partially because of demand, but it's also partially because of Biden's policies towards fossil fuels. You know, you cannot run a country, period, without fossil fuels, without energy. And to demonize fossil fuels in any way, coming from northwest New Mexico or living here most of my life, we know that fossil fuels fuel everything. And it's not just our way of life, it actually fuels energy across the country, across the world. And the United States has actually returned to being energy independent again. Now, what does that mean in light of things like the Ukrainian war? Because energy prices across the globe are spiking, and that's because Russian stuff is basically being sanctioned out of existence. Now, that's going to cause the rest of the world a lot of heartburn, but we have this little rule that very few people talk about in the United States where we can actually shut in production to the United States. That would cause an oil price difference to where probably about $70-$80 locally in the United States, where the rest of the world would have a functional floor of $200 or higher, with a ceiling of about $600 per barrel of oil. Where here, since we produce it and have a good infrastructure to move it around and people live where we actually produce energy, we wouldn't have that problem. Do I have a problem with the rest of the world kind of going away and burning? Not really. The point is that for a long time, we've kind of held up the ceiling for the rest of the world, and I'm kind of cool with the United States getting our wings back and to be able to do whatever the hell we want. I'm a very big fan of the United States. The heat wave will continue a little bit longer in northwest New Mexico. We're supposed to get a little bit of break in temperature, so we should have a little bit cooler, like in the high 90s instead of in the hundreds. That doesn't really help much, but it's still better than what it was. So these are what I've got for us with the new stuff and the new format to talk about the news and why it should matter to you in the 2A community, as well as giving you updates to the 2A issues that matter. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Be great.
In the top, I can't let it slide. My politics are rather controversial. Who would have thought that I ain't catching all slack and I have been in